Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Katherine Bennett.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
And joining us today are two Catholic novelists, Father Alexander Lucie-Smith, who you will have seen before if you follow this channel, and Simon Caldwell, who has just published his second book. Good morning, Father.
Good morning, Katherine. Good morning, Gavin. Good morning.
Father, I'll start with you. I introduced you both as Catholic novelists. Is that fair, do you think, or would it be better to say novelist who happens to be Catholic?
Well, I think, the books you produce come deep from the heart. So I'm quite happy to be called a Catholic novelist. And I'm also quite happy to be called a novelist who happens to be Catholic, because although, in my humble opinion, my books are deeply Catholic, they don't parade their Catholicism too much, I hope. They are quite subtly Catholic, I hope. They're not overtly didactic.
Subtly Catholic. Is there such a thing? Simon, let's go to you. What do you think of that? Of the description Catholic novelist or novelist who happens to be Catholic? How significant is your Catholicism to your writing?
Well, my Catholicism or my religious faith is significant to everything. It's not something I can escape from or wish to escape from. But I wouldn't like to be pigeonholed as a Catholic, just as a Catholic writer who writes Catholic fiction, because I think my books are for everybody. I mean, there is theological content, but I try to, I believe quite strongly that religion is a fact of life. It's not something that it can be compartmentalized and put in a little box. And so my books do have religious content, but again, I try not to be didactic, even though at times I might fail. But I try. I just the religion sort of comes into the story just because I think it's part of who I am. But I do try to make them universally accessible.
Yes, I suppose it depends on what we mean by a Catholic novel. As you said, it doesn't need to be about the life of Christ. It's not that. It is subtle, as Father said. But being Catholic, seeing the world in a certain way, having a sense of the supernatural can't help but permeate all that you do and be in everything that you do. It's the Catholic lens, isn't it? Father, do you want to tell us a little bit about your books? Because you have a series of books. And they're a particular genre, aren't they? Tell us about those, Father.
Yes, well, I'm writing about the mafia, but I'm writing about the mafia in Sicily. And one of the things that actually led me to write about the mafia was my profound admiration for, first of all, for The Sopranos, which I watched on the telly, and then before that for Mario Puzo's truly great novel, The Godfather. Now, the Godfather films are also exceptional, but the Godfather novel is a truly great novel, interspersed with some truly appalling bits, it has to be said. It's a real mixture. The end scene of The Godfather particularly haunted me for about 20 or 30 years. And that is when Kay Corleone goes to Mass with her mother-in-law, Mama Corleone, very early in the morning, and it's obviously a Tridentine Mass because there's an emphasis on silence and the ringing of the bell, and the second Confiteor. And then it says she goes up to receive Holy Communion and kneels at the altar rails. And then it says she goes back to her place and to pray for the soul of Michael Corleone. And that's how the novel ends. In other words, Michael is going to carry on as he has done already. He started off as a goodie, but now he's a confirmed baddie. He's a mafia boss. And she's got her life's vocation as well, which is to pray for the salvation of her husband. And you have this idea in the mafia in those days, which is 1950s, I think, early 60s, that the men go out and shoot people and do gambling and vice and things like that. The women stay at home and cook and look after the children, but they're the ones who are the men's guarantee of salvation. That famous thing that all Italians say, io sono cattolico, I'm a Catholic, ma la mia madre è fanatica, but my mother's a fanatic. Va in chiesa ogni domenica. She goes to Mass every Sunday, So the women are the fanatics who go to Mass indeed every day to pray for the men. Now, if you look at the end, that's the ending of the novel. If you look right at the beginning of the novel, something very interesting happens. A bit that doesn't make it into the film, like the ending doesn't make it into the film. The bit at the beginning is when Genco, the consigliere, is dying. And the Don, on the wedding day of his daughter, goes with his two sons to see his old friend Genco and says, Genco, my old friend, how are you? How are you? And Genco says, Godfather, the angel of death is in the room. Tell the angel of death to go away. Godfather, if you tell him to go away, he will go away. And the Godfather says, this is something I cannot do. And in other words, the Godfather is powerless in the face of death, though for most people, all their lives, the Godfather is what we call an immortality symbol. We're all oppressed people, we're all living a horrible life, but the Godfather is our salvation. But in the end, actually, it's the prayers of the women that will be our salvation. So in my humble opinion, the Godfather novel is a great Catholic novel, although only intermittently. And this comes up in the films, in the second Godfather film. If you remember when Don Fanucci goes to the feast and pins $100 note onto the veil of the Madonna during the feast in Little Italy, and then go like that. And then after all, Don Fanucci is murdered during the same feast. So you have Catholicism and death interspliced. And there's something very interesting, in my humble opinion, about the way Catholicism and death always go together, particularly in Sicily.
That's true of your novel as well, isn't it, Simon? The novels that you've written. I think it's fair to say both of them grapple with very dark themes, don't they? And as Father Alexander said, death. Do you want to tell us about yours?
Yes, certainly. I've only written two. The first one is this one, The Beast of Bethulia Park, and my latest one is Lady Mabel's Gold. I became a novelist almost by accident, really, because it was in lockdown, and I'm a journalist by trade, and in the previous decade, I'd done an awful lot of research and investigative journalism into the Liverpool care pathway, and interviewed families and doctors, whistleblowing doctors. I attended inquests, and I was very much involved in the campaign to have it abolished, which succeeded. So going into lockdown, I had a wealth of journalistic resources available. All this research that I had. And I started to read fiction, and I started to think, well, maybe I should write a book based on what I've been doing in the last few years. So yes, it is dark because it involves what the family say is deliberate killing of their relatives by medical negligence. So I had a couple of characters I was working with. But then it was so dark that I thought, well, I have to make it a bit sexy, I need to make some of the characters fall in love and things like that. And that's when that's when Calvin becomes besotted with Emerald. And then as it progresses, the characters develop. And then I changed it a little bit to make it supernatural. That Calvin was being tempted, and so it kind of keeps adding flesh and substance and depth to the story. And the thing about a novel is that once you get so far into it, you really, really want to finish it, and it take over your life. Both of these books took me 2 years. So the second one, so the first one really is, in a nutshell, is about the quest to unmask an NHS serial killer. So yes, it involves death and some very dark aspects of human behaviour. And the second one, again, grapples with good and evil, but this time it draws on my experience really of working on the Daily Mail foreign desk in the noughties when the wars were on in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I became aware of the theft of historical artifacts and their sale on the black market, and that sort of inspired me a little bit. It inspired a little part of the plot. And in my story, you have a gang of robbers, some of whom are ex-servicemen, who are raiding chantries in the belief that an historical artifact was looted in the Crusades and hidden in one of them. So In some ways, I was a little bit inspired by Dickens' portrayal of gangsters in Oliver Twist. I love the dialogue in Oliver Twist. And I really, really felt like you're there when they go out for ham sandwiches and this that. You really feel like you're in Dickensian London. I thought, well, that's just great. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to do something like that in contemporary weird? But so one of them, I have a chapter where the gangsters are all playing cards and then they fall out, and that's my attempt to get a tiny little bit close to what Dickens I think achieved. So. But yes, it's dark. There is some violence, yeah.
Yeah, there is some violence. Everyone be warned, and the rest. Gavin, I want to bring you in because I want to propose that actually the Reformation stripped so much of our Catholic identity, our Catholic culture. And one of the things that has been stripped away in that post-Reformation is this sense of mystery, the supernatural, grappling with good and evil, and of course Our Lady. And what Father spoke about there, I thought was brilliant. That I don't think you can have a Catholic novel that is absent an understanding of Our Lady of some kind, whether it's explicit, whether that's on the nose or subtle. I think you, when Father spoke about Kay, it's Kay, isn't it, Father? I think it's, yeah, when Father spoke about Kay and the women, and he said they guarantee the salvation of the men. And I thought that's very interesting, because that is the feminine, isn't it? And we live in a culture that has lost a sense of femininity and masculinity. We're very good at talking about female and male, boys and girls. We're very good at saying how interchangeable they are. Of course, they're not, though. And it escapes our notice, I think, in this post-Reformation horizontal materialist existence, that femininity and masculinity are principles of all creation, and that it is, we see that in Mary. She opens the road, she opens the way, she does this at the wedding at Cana, and she is co-redemptrix. And so the idea in those mafia novels that it's the women, it's specifically the women who guarantee the salvation of the men. It's in the womb that they bring these men to life, and it's through their sacrifice and prayer that those men are saved. I think that's a brilliant exposition of true femininity, even in the darkness. Father Alexander, I know, is desperate to come in, but just Gavin, on the Protestant point, do you agree that actually we've lost so much, and it could be said that our literature is all the poorer for that?
You're not going to contain me on just the Protestant point. I've got 15 points building up. I'll try and get them out in bullet points very, very quickly. On the Protestant point, there was a very interesting remark by Peter Ackroyd, the novelist, who noticed that the English are responsible for about 85% of the ghost stories in world literature. It's just such an extraordinary thing that he asked the question, how on earth can that possibly be? Why on earth should we be consumed with ghost stories as novelists and as storytellers? And his answer, which I think is a very good one, it may not be true, but it's as close to truth I can get, is that there was such a profound trauma at the Reformation when the monasteries were disappeared and the English people stopped being able to pray for their dead, that there's been, if you like, an underground neurosis that has just been, that a whole country has been unable to deal with. And so, like all neuroses, it starts in one place and comes up in another, and you can't deal with it properly, and hence an absolute preoccupation with that kind of fake supernatural, or and an inability to relate properly with the supernatural relationship that we have with the dead. So that's one element. I want to pick up a more important point maybe and say that I profoundly disagree with both our authors, who are terribly cagey and really nervous about being known as Catholic in case they were seen as being didactic. I'll tell you who's didactic. It's me. I'm an academic. Any books I've written are academic books. I'm as didactic as you can get. I set out to. You're not remotely didactic. You are poets of the imagination, in which you tell stories about human nature, and you might, as Father Lucie-Smith does, slip in some marvelous Catholic culture, or as Simon does, have a priest pulling a man out of a grate to give him the last rites just before he snuffs it. But these are almost accidental to the culture. You don't go anywhere near being didactic. What you do is you present a world in which people can be redeemed. And I think that's the great characterization. I mean, that's what I think Graham Greene was so wonderful at. So Greene Green writes about Monsignor Quixote, perhaps, and he has a wonderful story about a couple of Spaniards in a brothel, and it's making enormous fun of Father Don Quixote's shyness, but it's his cast of mind that is so powerful. And I think one of the virtues of being I think we can own being a Catholic writer, because what you bring is not the tediousness of Catholic culture, who goes to church when, or how people say their prayers, but what you bring is this profound understanding of human nature, and above all, the possibility that evil can be redeemed in people. And that seems to me to run right at the heart of the Catholic mind. And you may not think yourselves as overtly Catholic, but you absolutely are, as I think Tolkien was. I would say J.K. Rowling had a Christian cast of mind. She may not know it, but I think the reason why her books were so immensely successful was because she too dealt with heroic redemption, and absolutely from a Christian point of view, though it was not explicit. I think the best novelists understand human nature in a Catholic way. And I'd say, if we did have the time, I'd want to go back and say that's what Shakespeare did. And he deliberately hid it, precisely because if he got caught being a Catholic in any kind of way at all, the consequences would have been enormously severe. And one of the magnificent things Shakespeare does is to bring the Catholic frame of mind to the human narrative, and then disguise the fact it's Catholic at all, but tell you all about love and redemption and humour. And fate and tragedy all the time. So I think you can both relax. You're not going to be didactic. You can leave it to pedants like me, but continue to be poets of the Catholic imagination, evangelizing people with a Catholic vision of humanity and the promise of forgiveness and redemption.
Yeah, I think I see it a bit like shifting gears. You're stuck somewhere around third gear unless you have a Catholic imagination, that you shift gears and you can get deeper, because it's not so much that it's Catholic in its explicit themes about the church, but it's God created nature, God creates, and therefore you are dealing with the stuff of nature and supernature. Father, you were wanting to come in. I think we were talking first about the idea of femininity and masculinity and the exposition through the novel, and then Gavin spoke about the grappling with those themes of
lots of things to say about that too. It's my turn again.
Yeah. Yes, Gavin, I'll come back to you. But Father, on that point,
yeah, one of the Catholic themes that does emerge in my own writing, which rather surprised me because it wasn't something I deliberately put in, it just came out, is that the mafia dons, the mafiosi, are polyphiloprogenitive. That's to say, they want to have lots of children. Now, the reason they want to have lots of children is partly because they know they're going to die young, even though they only know that sort of they don't know that explicitly, but that the fear of death hangs over them all the time. Timor mortis conturbat me, the fear of death confuses me, as it says in the Requiem Mass. The other thing is, of course, that in the quarter they come from, of Catania, it's dominated by this church, and inside this church is the picture of the Spanish Madonna, which is a picture of Our Lady painted by Velázquez. Now, as it happens in real life, there are no Velázquezes in Sicily, so that's a joke, but that's the focus of their entire life is this Spanish Madonna. They may not believe in God, but they absolutely believe in the Spanish Madonna as the one who is, if you like, their passport to eternity, but also their passport to eternity and the people who are going to inherit their money. We've got the children. One of the mafia dons later on in one of the series has 13 children, not all by the same mother, and he is greatly admired for his vast family. Everybody wants to have children. Nobody believes in non-reproductive sexual intercourse. The whole point of having the sexual intercourse is to have children. And they're all a bit like Henry VIII in that regard. So I think that's an interesting thing that comes around. Why people don't want to have children nowadays, actually, this is something which we're all concerned about, is probably because they can't afford it and they don't have the money, and children are expensive. That's one of the things people told me, and housing is expensive. But of course, if you're in the cocaine trade, you've got tons of money. What are you going to do with the tons of money? Well, you're going to spend it on your children.
Well, there's a job tip for some of you struggling out there. Don't we find now, any of your thoughts on this, jump in, don't we find now that there's an inversion of truth? There's an attempt to try and invert what is true, and in a sense, by doing that, you're proving the truth of something. So we see it in Disney movies. We're inverting the hero. We're saying it's not the man who protects and saves the woman, it's the woman who jumps in and rescues the man. But that's not real, it's not true, that's not true to reality. We see it in stories that were presented to our children in school about, the pregnant husband or something. And these things don't last. They're not lasting because they're incoherent. The only way that these stories can live on is through tyrannical force. The only way they can live on is through tyranny, through pushing and proposing and propagandizing. But in the Catholic novel, in the Catholic stories, because you're dealing with the truth of the human condition, it's perennial. These are perennial truths and they'll live on. So why I think it's so important to have novels written by Catholics who are steeped in truth is because that we need to be reminded in this age where especially our young people are having so much pushed at them that is untrue, that is incoherent, and that could not last in the memory and be passed along without force. And to say, no, here. And then when you pick up that the books you're writing, the movies and the books that deal with truth of the human condition, they recognise it. So the powers that be that want to this dictatorship of relativism, that want to push truth away, don't want to see these themes dealt. They don't want to have books like yours written. They'd rather kids were picking up, I don't know, some crap book. I can't think of a name because, of course, I don't have any on my shelves. But what do you think about that, Simon? This idea of that it's nice to write a novel. It's a good story, but there's an even deeper reason that is we need to continue to write stories that reveal truth. We have a duty, almost an obligation to do so.
You're absolutely right. The commitment to the truth is right at the core of what I've been trying to do. I believe in objective truth, objective moral truth. I was lapsed Catholic for quite a few years, and I came back quite strongly after I read Veritatis Splendor, the 1993 encyclical by Pope St. John Paul II, which deals with this question of truth. And Newman, again, Cardinal Newman is one of my great heroes. He wrote about it all the time. I prepared for the launch of Lady Mabel's Gold on Friday by praying a novena to Cardinal Newman. And so it's right. And what I've tried to do in both books, I mean, both of them stories are quite tall stories and they're fast moving, but I try to keep them as real as possible. But where if somebody there's a spiritual consequence to human action. It's not a celebration of evil without consequences. You see characters change when they sin, or struggled or haunted by what they've done, and I think that's the key to good literature. But like you say, people recognise then the human condition, where we really are. And you see it in non-Catholic authors as well. I mean, I read Teresa Rakin, for example, by Zola for the first time, and he said that in his preface that this isn't a religious book, but then you can see after they murder Teresa's husband, how the characters change and they each recognise that the evil in the other, and they never get the relationship back where they thought it would go. I've also been reading quite a bit of Tom Wolfe, and he does the same thing, social realism. Somebody said to me recently, I think it was William Cash, that The Bonfire of the Vanities couldn't be written now because it's too close to the bone, it's too raw. But these are precisely the books we should be writing. The books that tell the truth. I mean, what we live in now is a ridiculous postmodern era where truth, people have done away with truth and constructing all kinds of silly ideologies which are destructive. But in one sense, that's an invitation for people like us to say, well, hang on a minute. This is what the world is really like. This is what really matters. So, in Lady Mabel's Gold, for example, my policemen aren't tough guys who are heroes. I mean, I'm not saying that police people are bad, but they're woke. the threatening journalists with non-crime hate incident reports because they've used the wrong pronoun and so on. And so you see people as I think if somebody read it, they would recognise this decade of the 21st century in which we live, and that's the whole point. I think why else would you bother? So yeah, it does. I mean, the truth is that, and that goes right back to, you talk about what is a Catholic novel. Well, you can go back to Aquinas, you can go back to Jacques Maritain, you can go to the Catechism, and they all talk about truth. Even Conrad is giving the great Flannery O'Connor used to quote Joseph Conrad all the time. That the point, what his attempt to, in his writing, is trying to render the greatest justice to the visible world, because the visible world, it speaks of the invisible world. It's sacramental in that sense. And the closer the more accurate you are, then the more spiritual and supernatural and enduring I think your work will be.
I like very much what Simon says about social realism, and I think that is absolutely essential. When you're writing a novel, you're writing about people as they actually are. You're not writing about the cleaned up version of humanity, which some people take rather too seriously today. The great thing about Sicily is that wokedom has not quite arrived there. The other thing about Sicily is, of course, is that Catania is filthy, and the people who live in Catania, or many of the people who live in Catania, are very poor indeed. And the truth about poverty is very rarely written about. It was written about, of course, in Dickens, but today you tend not to read books about very poor people, the sort of people who, when they, let's say, go through a market and look at the food on sale, think, oh, how lovely it would be to eat that, but of course I never can. The idea, for example, in Italy, in the south of Italy, the concept of famine is not very far away. The last famine in the south of Italy was 1948, when people died of starvation. That idea that poverty is just round the corner, or the lack of money is completely round the corner. If we do have money, we've only got it now. We're not going to have it forever. That is something that people experience every day in Italy. The other thing people experience every day in Sicily is violence. Men kill men and men torture men. That's an actual fact. In the first of my books, The Chemist of Catania, there is a very very realistic, I think, and gruesome torture scene, which a lot of readers found very hard to take. But that is a fact. Gangsters are not nice to each other. They rule by the power of the fist. And the other thing, of course, is that for some women who are reduced to poverty and who have children, go into prostitution. The number one reason for a woman to go into prostitution is to feed her children. Now, you see, a mother's desire to feed her children is the strongest desire she's got. And that is the thing that will drive her to prostitution. And that happens, that is the thing in my book. The prostitutes are mothers as well as prostitutes. They're not just good time girls who are in it for sheer fun. They wouldn't be, would they? That, I think, is quite a fact. That's just simply a fact. So I write about prostitutes and I write about murderers, but that's because these people exist and somebody's got to write about them. And also they appeal to my imagination, I must say, because the sinner and the saint are the same person. The saint is an ex-sinner, and the sinner is a future saint.
Yeah, brilliant. I think I want to pick up on, you've both spoken about truth, and the truth is, and this is what you've said about the books you write and about the ones you write, Simon, the truth is that there are consequences to our actions. That is true. What the novel does, the good novel does, is it shows all that darkness, but shows the consequence. Flannery O'Connor, you've mentioned. I was discussing Flannery O'Connor with Gavin in Wigan this weekend, and how he was surprised to hear quite how dark some of her tales were. And what you see is the consequences always of the actions, and the consequence of choosing not to take the wrong path. In both cases, the choice. But because we live in an increasingly artificial world, we are masked from those consequences. You think of the contraceptive pill. The contraceptive pill masks both women and men from the consequences of pregnancy. Injections, AIDS used to be something men feared, all people feared, but especially gay men feared. Now you can medicate, carry on with your life, carry on with your behaviour. We'll deal with the symptoms, but don't worry about it. There'll be a drug, there'll be a pill. Now young girls and then young boys are given the HPV vaccine. This will stop you getting cervical cancer. Go out, have sex with who you want, whenever you want, use people, and we will protect you from the consequences of that. Transhumanism is the ultimate. Being fat and unhealthy, you can't say that anymore. You're fat shaming. Let's have models who are really overweight and say, don't they look wonderful? Because the truth is, no, if you're really fat and unhealthy, you're not looking that good. And it's a lie to tell you are, but we shield all the time. Let's shield you from the consequences. The true consequences then can only be seen if we write the truth. And that is, again, increasingly important in a world that is increasingly artificial, and will keep our young people from recognising and living and experiencing the consequences of their behaviours. But it'll always catch up to us in the end. I think it's deadly, a deadly time we live in. What do you think? Someone, Gavin, anyone?
Yes, no, I do. And I think I've been thinking more as we've been talking about how the novel, the Catholic novel, the novel written in the Catholic mindset is above all subversive in some ways. So you've been talking about the search for the truth. The reason it's subversive is that people create false truths for themselves, cosmetic, aberrational pictures of humanity. I was thinking that of different examples of, in one sense, it might sound too parochial to say, look how Gavin wants to promote the Catholic mindset. But I was thinking, for example, of Homer or Beowulf, imaginations that get set in pagan mindsets, and thinking, well, what are they dealing with? They're dealing with fate and with heroism, and they're trying to tell the truth as they see it. But without the experience of the incarnation, they're fumbling around like that lovely Saxon picture of a bird coming into a drinking hall at night, from the darkness through the light and back into the darkness again, without any real triangulation. And I was thinking one of the reasons why Tolkien is so fantastically successful is because he brings the Catholic mind in one of its most explicitly worked out forms to the public, without any sense at all that they're dealing with religion or philosophy or human nature. He disguises it in this myth to such an enormous extent. And so Tolkien is deeply subversive. He's subversive of the industrialization. I loved one of the things we haven't talked about, although Katherine and Father Lucie-Smith have, is the relationship between the sexes, and how, again, one of the things we're constantly presented with is untruths about the consequences of people living together as if they're interchangeable hedonists, and how that doesn't work out. The untruth that human beings have no conscience, and actually much of the way in which most people experience God vividly is through the enormous pressure of a conscience they can't control, but nonetheless disturbs them all the time. I think the Catholic novel is a subversive act. It intends to expose, by contrast, the vacuity and the artificiality of other ways of dealing with human nature, and because it tells the truth, it has such power to it.
Yeah, do either of you want to jump in on that? Any comments?
I agree. It is subversive. All novels are subversive. I mean, the most subversive novelist we ever had was Charles Dickens. The death of little Joe. It was a terrible, terrible reproach to society of his day. And I'm quite subversive too, because the mafia are obviously subversive. But the other thing that they're really subversive of is that they are a hangover from the 1860s, when the mafia emerged. And modern progress should have cured us of organized crime. But modern progress turns out not to be so very progressive after all. Progress, the myth of progress, is just that. It's a myth, not a reality. And there are many people on our planet who have been left behind by progress. there's something.
You could almost say, Father, that modern progress is the story of the progressiveness into organised crime. I mean, we have that's our great complaint with the rich people who run us. They are very well organised rich criminals.
Can we just take a moment to laugh at them knocking down the rainforest to build a runway for people to arrive for COP 30 or something? Anyway,
Absolutely.
Simon.
I agree with also that good literature is subversive. It should be subversive. It should disturb you. Just a little bit about the Beast of Bethulia Park is when I finished it, I handed it around to a few people who I'm quite close to. You know, this is the draft of a book. What do you think? And one person came back to me and said, "I'm really disappointed." He said, "You're attacking the NHS in a pandemic. How can you do that?" And this person said, "I think you should bin it." So there's a few others. And when I did actually go looking for an agent, trying to get a traditional publisher, and the time and again they'd say that the agents. Quite a few agents said it's really well written and I really like it, but I just don't know what I can do with this. The publishing industry isn't going to be interested. But good luck and so on. And I went to a Catholic publishing house and it was rejected by them as well. And there's on the grounds that it was critical of the NHS, that there was sex and animal cruelty. And so no mention of the human cruelty, of which there is much. You know, they had a psychopathic doctor, but that's all right. Except that he was an NHS employee, so I couldn't. So therefore, it was beyond the pale. So it makes you all the more determined to get it out. You know, when you see that kind of censorship. But that's censorship on one level to a story which is considered to be subversive. But then on another level, the Catholic community isn't supporting these books as they should, and part of the reason is, but fewer people read these days, but also the Catholic mind isn't. A lot of Catholics don't understand what Catholic fiction is, or have a very weird idea of what should be in a book. I mean, so you get these. Sometimes they think Flannery O'Connor wrestled with this all the time because she was criticised by Catholics who took a very Manichaean, puritanical view, and they criticised the violence, they criticised the sin. They wanted a kind of like an Eden, humanity before the fall, where people aren't tempted and people don't sin, and that isn't the real world. No. Catholic novels should show people, like Father Alexander said, as they really are, warts and all, humanity in need of redemption, and then you can get to writing stories about redemptive beauty, about the action of grace in changing people's lives, how people respond to the disturbance that sin causes and the misery that sin causes. I don't want to give too much away, but in Lady Mabel's Gold, I deliberately have a character who's been a criminal all his life, and as the story progresses, he undergoes something of a change, an interior change, which results in an absolute turnaround in the way he sees the world. And it's a very kind of crudely described, really. I mean, because I think in reality it'd be a lot more subtle and go for a lot longer. But you've only got so many 100 pages, so you say, well, here it is. So in that sense, I'm glad to be subversive, and I encourage anybody who wants to be a journalist, a novelist, to be subversive. And I would also encourage people to go out and read subversive novels.
Yeah, subversive because we're born standing on our heads, aren't we? As Chesterton says. So this idea that you should also, I think, Simon, I think what you said there is brilliant and frightening, but true, that there are people horrified by animal cruelty while totally ignoring the human cruelty. That is such an indication of where we are. And we need to be able to take things that we can't attack and attack them, take things that we're told we mustn't expose and expose them. That's an absolutely crucial duty. And I'm so glad that you're both doing it. But we deify the NHS. We've totally deified the NHS, and it's failing. And we're meant to hold it up and say, isn't this wonderful thing that we're all pleased with? No, God love the nurses and doctors, But it's terrible. It's an awful system that's not fit for purpose. But can you say that? No, you can't say that. So I think you're right. We have to be able to speak these things, expose these things, and attack the things that we're told you can't touch, you can't go there.
Can I
Gavin?
a brief interlude? Well, it's just that you and I, Katherine, have been talking about this, and I found it so interesting, given what Simon has just said, that one of the problems about being a late convert is that one's Catholic mind is undeveloped, or one's Catholic instincts are undeveloped. And I've, having become a Catholic, one of the things I've become more aware of is the influence of evangelical Puritanism on my moral thinking. And I'm beginning to strongly regret it, because I think it's idealistic and very beautiful, but it's not true. And again, I realize now one of the reasons I've loved Graham Greene so much is that through Greene I had access to a Catholic understanding of grace, and was able to some extent resist the Simon used the word, and it's a good word, the Manichaean aspects, the kind of heavy dualistic stuff of Puritanism. I think, so let's go back to something Simon said earlier on. Simon talked to me briefly about how he had a vocation, an absolute need to be a novelist, to be a creative writer, to tell the stories that he had in him, so that other people can read them. And one of the reasons I need to read Simon's book, and was so delighted to, and one reason I need to read a Catholic novelist's book, and why I think Father Lucie-Smith writes too, is because by this means my imagination becomes more purified, in a sense. I need the Catholic novel in order to strip me of those aberrations, and to allow me particularly to enter more freely into a response to grace and beauty and forgiveness and the supernatural, and a clearer view of good and evil, and a clearer understanding of the way in which men and women work, and the discovery of Our Lady. If I have, so many Protestants have discovered Our Lady through Galadriel without even knowing it, but suddenly, because how many Catholics have been able to write about Our Lady in a way without saying this is Mary, but instead here is the figure that you need to have a relationship with in order to come closer to what Our Lady represents.
And the danger is that you're just dealing with in the religion of nice, which we've seen is a problem. We can see is the religion of nice. Everybody's nice. Like Simon says, we're all saints, and I'm a good Christian person writing a nice Christian novel, and everybody's nice and kind to each other. It's not real. Reality first. If we're all that nice, there's no need of a saviour. So we need to deal with reality. Father, come in.
Yes, here I am.
Yeah, just come in, because I know you've been. Sorry, someone's phone. Is that you, Gav?
It is. I'm holding it so that it doesn't cause any disturbance.
It does.
I can see my mic. I'll mute myself, and then the person.
Yeah. Okay.
I think what Gavin says about the Catholic novel being uplifting and so on is true, of course. But there's also the other side, and that my own books are, if you read them, they'll put you through the mangle, I think, because you will suddenly discover there are all sorts of ghastly vices that you never knew existed. And therefore, they're not. It's not the ideal present for your maiden auntie at Christmas. I have to say, it might give her a severe jolt, but maybe she needs a severe jolt. So go ahead and do it, I think.
just to finish, because we've been talking for some time, and you can wrap up with any final thoughts. But this is a very interesting read here by poet Andrew Thornton Norris, The Spiritual History of English, and he says that there's a sense that the English are a chosen people and have this great literary gift, and need to put it into practice. As our Lord says, you give you these talents, don't bury them in the ground, but they need to be fertile. So to what extent do you both think that the English novel, that we have a particular duty, or that our Englishness is significant to the work that you both do?
Yes, I mean, I'm delighted that we have this wonderful literary tradition, and I think I still go back and read books that have been written decades, if not centuries ago, and really, really enjoy them. My favourite author probably is Graham Greene. I'm not very original, but one of I remember being like a 13-year-old boy or something like that, and in an English class, and the teacher gave us a comprehension. This is a passage from The Power and the Glory. I didn't know anything about it by then, and it's where the priest gets the bone off this crippled dog because he's so hungry. And I remember sitting there thinking, what is this? This is just amazing. And as soon as I had any money, I went out and bought the book and devoured it. And I've been reading Graham Greene since. Yeah. And you keep discovering these great authors. We have this great tradition, and of course, which has inspired an awful lot of authors across the pond as well. So you have these great American authors. I mentioned one earlier, Tom Wolfe. And there are many others who I've read who are also producing great literature. And that doesn't mean I also read I read a bit of French authors as well. I love Francois Mauriac, Zola. But I think as a nation we've produced some great writers and some great Catholic writers, and I hope I might just be part of that tradition. But I still think I've got a long way to go.
Father.
I have to say I love The Power and the Glory by Graham Greene for a variety of reasons. One of the things I love about the English language is it doesn't just belong to England, it belongs to the whole world. And of course, I remember I was in Nicaragua and I said to the person who was showing me around, I said, this place is very Graham Greenish. And he said, what do you mean? And I had to explain what it meant. I said, this is the sort of place where men come who've ruined their lives and who wear white suits and then drink themselves into oblivion. There was that it was raining and it's a tropical rainstorm, and it just gave you that very heavy atmosphere that you get in many of the Graham Greenish parts of the world. And Graham Greene wrote about abroad a great deal, didn't he? And the English language belongs in all these worlds. In Latin America and, of course, North America, Ireland and so on. And also, let's say, smaller places like Trinidad and so on, where they took the English language and they made it into something quite extraordinary, it has to be said. And one of the things is, of course, that this, just to say you can see it, the latest of my effusions, it's about Sicily, but it's actually, I had to explain to somebody, it's actually not about Sicily at all. It's about how not Sicily as it is at the foot of Italy, but Sicily inside the head of an English person, the Sicily of the mind. It's an imaginary country that just happens to be called Sicily and resembles Sicily geographically. But we English have this way of going all over the world and having English thoughts about strange places and turning them into fiction. I mean, Graham Greene was a genius of that.
We mentioned Greene and Simon's mentioned a few authors. Any favourite authors we haven't mentioned, Father Alexander?
Well, we haven't said that much about Evelyn Waugh, have we? And probably the greatest Catholic novel.
Nice guy, I hear.
A great guy, yeah. The greatest Catholic novel ever written was, in fact, even though many people dislike it, but most people think it's absolutely wonderful, Brideshead Revisited is the greatest Catholic novel ever written. Although it does have its drawbacks, I must say. My wonderful tutor at Oxford, Mrs. Bednarowska, she said she could not believe in the conversion of Lord Marchmain. Fine. The other thing, of course, that's a little bit worrying about Waugh's world is that they're all upper-class people. Whereas I think it's much better to write about people who are at the bottom of the pile. I really do. In the sense, I find that life is sort of more gritty, and those are the people who've been ignored. And I think those are the people we need to think about.
Of course, we haven't mentioned C.S. Lewis because he wasn't a Catholic, but he had a very Catholic mind, I think one has to say, and some of his works were prophetic. We've just been talking about that hideous strength and how prophetic that's showing itself to be. But yes, it's that Catholic lens. Simon, anything to finish off? Any last thoughts from either of you before we wrap up for today?
What I'd like to say is please buy my books, because not because I'm looking for a Bentley or a broodmare or anything like that, but we need to support
or a Vauxhall.
People. Yeah. But I just think that it's not just about us writing books. We need people to read them, and we need a flourishing Catholic literary culture, but throughout the English-speaking world. So it's not always easy to get our books on the shelves of the high street. It's very, very crowded and competitive. So we will rely, I think, I'm speaking for myself, really, I suppose, on the goodwill and the effort, really, of people who want to support this kind of literature to help us just by buying our books.
What he says, buy my books as well. I've read his book and it's great, but buy my books as well. They're exclusively available on Amazon and they're on Kindle, and you can buy your own paperback as well, and it comes in the post. They're also very cheap, I think. So do buy my books. And I do think, actually, Simon's got a very good point, is that our church should be a beacon of culture. And one of the things that every parish church is also a cultural centre. We want people to live a culturally rich life. And that means reading books, talking about books, and other things as well as that. But that's something we want to encourage. So get involved and sort of start arguing. Pick up a few books. If you haven't read Mario Puzo's The Godfather, for goodness sake, get it now, because it's one of the great classics of the 20th century. So pick up a book.
I'd like to say three things. One of the reasons why the question that Katherine raised may be pertinent is because French has 100,000 words, German has 135,000 words, English has 500,000 words. We have this extraordinary vocabulary. And that might be because we were invaded by the wretched Normans, but whatever it is, we do have this fantastic resource of the English language. That's the first thing. Secondly, don't buy my book. It's very expensive, and it's only for people who want didacticism. But do buy your books, because thinking back, my book was about the Oxford Inklings, and actually, if we want to make a serious point about it, the reason why Lewis, who had an Anglo-Catholic mind, and Charles Williams, who had the same, and Tolkien, who had a properly Catholic mind, are so powerful is because they tell the truth in an extraordinarily vivid and accurate and subversive way. But we need to buy the books of Catholic writers today, partly because we need to support the Catholic imagination. It's a vocation. It's a charism. It's a gift of the Holy Spirit, making nature not perfect, but putting using our human nature to the glory of God. And it would be very irresponsible if we didn't actually create a platform where people with this gift and this calling could write and begin to both act subversively and recreatively for the rest of us, because sometimes, particularly those of us who have academic imaginations, are too boring, and we need to be ushered into this glorious world which is on the way to the supernatural and ultimately to heaven. And I can't wait for Katherine to write her book, because I know she's a frustrated novelist who just needs some time and a sponsor, probably a very rich sponsor. But once Katherine has joined the hallowed grounds of published authors, the world would be a better place. So thank you both for writing your books. They're wonderful, and looking forward to Mrs. Bennett's. She's got the right surname for it.
Yes, I have. Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you both for joining us. I think your words there, Simon, very important. And I think, Gavin, that's what we are trying to do. That's part of our apostolate, is this flourishing Catholic culture. We want to raise awareness. We want this Catholic revival. We're part of, we feel, a Catholic revival. And so to have you both come on and speak is wonderful. And hopefully people will go and buy your books. And then maybe you'll come back, both of you, perhaps during a live conversation where we can have people ask questions to us as we record, having bought your books and reflected upon them. But yes, this is something that is very important, especially as a parent. I'm sure many of you watching will be parents, and you turn on the television, you watch films, you watch programs, you pick up books from the library, and they're all pushing these false, incoherent messages. So it's time for Catholics to step up, write about the grubby truth of our human condition and redemption and grace, the penetration of grace. It's all there for the taking, for the writing, for the reading. So get to it. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining, Father Alexander. Thank you, Simon Caldwell. And you will find links below to both of their books, which we hope you pick up. But for now, thank you for watching. I'm Katherine Bennett.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
For those of you looking to buy Simon Caldwell's novels, The Beast of Bethulia Park and Lady Mabel's Gold, these are almost sold out now on Amazon UK. However, they can still be purchased online and delivered very quickly from Waterstones, Foyles, Barnes & Noble, and direct from the publisher Gracewing. And also they can be ordered on Amazon.com, which can be delivered from the US to the UK and anywhere else around the world. So they can be purchased. And isn't it so often the case that any good work seems to be met with resistance and obstacles, but we won't let those get in our way. So we hope you buy the books and enjoy them, and we'll host the authors again soon for some conversation and questions that you might have. Thank you.